Well, welcome back to another episode of the Road to Salt webinar series. So glad you guys have taken time of your day to come here and learn and grow together. That is the spirit of Salt Community, that we would learn together, because there's something powerful when we get a chance to sort of let iron sharpen iron, and we learn from other genius leaders and strategists and people who love the local church, and we come alongside and ask our questions in an environment where we can hear what their answers are and we can learn from others' questions. And so I encourage you today, as we dive into today's topic, make sure that you put your questions in the chat. It's going to be rich. It's going to be incredible. This is the final series of our year-long webinar series called Road to Salt. And we're going to be starting a 3-part series this week, followed up by the next 2 weeks with our friend Brian Taylor on worship. So this is going to be incredible. I hope that you take lots of notes, and I hope that you dig in, and I hope that you enjoy all the teaching that's about to come. Brian is currently the Vice President of Worship and Creative Arts at Slingshot Group. He has also spent years as a worship leader at a variety of different churches of all different sizes, including Prestonwood, in Dallas, Covenant, and then of course Christ Fellowship at Palm Beach. And now he spends his days coaching and helping people all across the U.S., from creative to leadership to worship topics. And so we are in for a treat. Without further ado, here is our friend Brian Taylor.
Hey everybody, welcome in. So glad to see you today. Excited for our time together. Okay, before we get started though, I want to tell you about a time I made one of my worship team members cry. It's worth noting that this was many years ago. It's early in my full-time ministry journey, and though I had served in church, my background up until that point was primarily as a professional musician. I was used to working with musicians and singers that valued and even welcomed direct feedback. And in situations like being in the recording studio where time was money, I had learned to just get right to it and move on. It turns out, surprise, that's not how they did things at this church. That team wasn't used to that kind of feedback at all. I was in rehearsal, the team was there, we were getting ready for service, and I looked at a team member after a pretty rough little go at a chorus or something like that. And I think I said something along the lines of, okay, that was pretty rough. Let's not ever do that again. Ouch. That particular team member ran off the stage in tears, and unfortunately, I was completely oblivious to what had happened. Gratefully, the woman who is now my wife pulled me aside afterwards and clued me into my huge error. I wasn't trying to be unkind. It's just my primary reference wasn't how people did music ministry in that church. It was how I'd led music in the other environments that I'd been a part of. And I wonder, how often do we go into situations thinking we have complete understanding, we've got know-how, only to realize that there's so much we don't know. Leading worship in a local church context is a beautiful privilege. Still, it often comes with challenges and realities that don't always feel very inspiring, and this makes it easy for us to get discouraged. Sustaining longevity in ministry is especially important in a time when so many leaders are throwing in the towel. What we're going to do together is address some of the realities we face as worship leaders and the tools we need to set us and our teams up for long-term success. Okay, if we've not met before, though, I'm Brian. Nice to meet you. I'd love to know where you are joining from, so let me know in the comments below. A little bit about me. For over 20 years, I've served the local church, primarily as a worship and creative pastor, and now as VP of Worship and Creative Arts at Slingshot Group. I get to work with leaders all over the country, helping churches and nonprofits build healthy teams. And I'm hoping to help you do that today and maintain your joy while you do. Okay, with that out of the way, I wonder, do we have any fans of Mission Impossible in the house? Let me know. If so, this is a familiar scene for you. A seemingly innocuous character delivers a nondescript package to a secret agent, Ethan Hunt. Ethan opens the package, identifies himself, and then comes the iconic line, "Your mission should you choose to accept it. The mysterious voice then goes on to explain the mission, the target, and the next steps before alerting Ethan that the package is about to self-destruct. That's probably a part we can all relate to sometimes. How quickly can I get this mission that's about to explode out of my hands? Nonetheless, wouldn't it be nice if that's what happened to us when we were called into ministry? Someone sits down and explains to us in great detail what we should be doing, how we should be doing it, and what we're going to need to do it well. Here's the reality. I probably don't need to tell you this. Many of us have not had the benefit of a mission briefing. You might be watching right now and not even have a correct job description. You and I, we've had to figure it out as we go. So this is where I'd like to start today, making sure that we have an understanding of our foundational role as a worship pastor or leader in ministry. First, it's important for us to recognize that as humans, we are wired to connect, to feel, to experience. This inclination doesn't end when it comes to the things of God. In fact, it started with Him. He created us to know Him, His nature, His power, His grace. Man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. As worship leaders, we have the sacred responsibility of helping steward what happens when the church gathers, be it in a sanctuary or a living room. We get to create environments that set the stage for an encounter with God's presence and power. And we love a good mountaintop experience, don't we? When the room is charged, hands are up, the church is roaring in song. There's something so special about those moments. Even if you take it out of the church context, have you ever seen a band like a Coldplay play live? When I saw them years ago for my birthday, I don't think I closed my mouth after that show started other than to wipe off the drool and the tears. Or when I had amazing seats at a Miami Heat game, and the first time they scored, you would have thought that they won the championship in that moment right then and there. It was electric, and I found myself screaming, and I wasn't even really a Heat fan. What this shows us is how much the desire for these kinds of experiences are hardwired into us as humans. So back to us as worship leaders. You and I get to see some pretty incredible things happen. These encounters that we get to steward have the power to produce something. They have the power to produce transformation. We see this in Paul and Silas's prison experience in Acts chapter 16. They find themselves thrown in prison after being attacked by a crowd, stripped and flogged. We pick up at verse 25, likely a familiar passage to many of us. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly, there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken. At once, all the prison doors flew open and everybody's chains came loose. Now, this is where we often stop, especially if you grew up in the black church like I did. That would be a perfect time to cue the shout music. Okay, wow, what an incredible encounter. Those chains are coming off. And it is an incredible start to the story. But the story doesn't end there. In fact, I'd say this encounter wasn't about a prison break at all. The jailer, hearing the commotion, wakes up and prepares to take his own life. When he realizes what has happened, Paul shouts, "Don't harm yourself. We're all here." Now, I'm sure there are some real criminals in there, and rightly so, but no one tries to escape. Everyone stays put. And then watch what happens. In verse 29, the jailer calls for lights, rushes in, and falls trembling before Paul and Silas. He brings them out and asks, "Sir, what must I do to be saved?" That night, the jailer and his entire household end up getting baptized. He takes Paul and Silas to his house, washes their wounds, and feeds them. And then they go back to the prison. The next day, the magistrates that had jailed them order their release. And Paul says, "After how you've treated us, you can come and escort us out yourselves." And guess what? They do just that. We can focus so much on the prison praise break that we miss the seed of transformation planted in the prisoners and the life change for the jailer and his family. And let me ask you this, what do you think is the better testimony? that Paul and Silas escaped like criminals in the middle of the night, or that they had the opportunity to escape, but they stayed and instead were publicly escorted out by the same ones who put them in prison. Here's the thing. If we stop at just the encounter, we can miss the transformation the encounter is designed to produce. The beauty and power of an encounter with God is that we should never leave the same way we came in. The revelation of who He is changes us. We leave more in love with Jesus and more like Him. And this should be at the heart of how we lead. As we're leading our worship ministry and worship moments, we first have to be clear on our mission. You and I are called to create environments of encounter that produce transformation. We have to lead with transformation, with discipleship in mind. As pastors and ministry leaders, this is our mission. Now, you may be saying, that sounds amazing, but Brian, have you seen my to-do list? The planning center declines, my days full of meetings, and the 75 events we're hosting just this weekend, all with a volunteer team, 2 open staff positions, and an election season to round out the mix. I hear you. And with that foundation laid, let's get a little bit more practical and talk about how we can accomplish this mission in the context of the never-ending, ever-increasing demands of ministry in the local church.